This is Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. Thanks for joining us. Today we have a very special guest. Reverend Jim Stretchberry is on the program. He's had an amazing life. You'll hear about him from being born in France in 1947, incredible family story, 3 adopted children, amazing story, amazing experiences. You won't want to miss it. So stay with us. The Good Life is next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. My guest today is Reverend Jim Stretchberry. Jim is a friend. He is kind of a legend, I would say, in Santa Barbara. He's had an incredible story, and I just want to welcome you, Jim.
Thank you, Dean. So happy to be here with you. After all this, we kind of had this planned for a few months.
We have. Things have been pretty interesting in the world.
They have.
So I'm glad to finally be here, socially distanced as we are. Let's start kind of, and I want to get into current events, and I want to talk a little bit about kind of the world and all that in a minute, but I thought maybe it would be helpful to start. I'm just interested in your life. As I was reading about you, you were born in France in 1947, spent 10 years in France, came to the States, went to Australia for 7 years, back to the States. So talk a little bit about your upbringing, just kind of what was that like? You were in boarding schools all over the place? And
well, Dean, it was kind of interesting for us, you know, and now I'm at this age where I kind of play the videos of everything I can remember from my earliest memory to now, and it's kind of interesting how God really speaks to you in that.
Yeah.
But I think a lot about my life and where I've been and where I could have been, and it's really helpful for me when I minister to other people. But my mom was a Holocaust survivor, and my parents met in the French Resistance in the 1940s. And my mom was only 18 when Hitler invaded Poland. She was from Danzig. And she was just a freshman in the university and very idealistic and didn't see Hitler for what he was, even though some of her family did.
Oh.
But 90% of her family perished in the Holocaust.
Oh my.
And then my mom became an adult way before she should have been. She came from a very protective family, very influential family in Danzig. And so she was there in the resistance, and then met my father there, who had been shot down and found his way in the resistance. And they married, and they had children because they had children, not planned children. And so my mom recently told my wife, she said, you know, she wished that they would have had a way not to have children at that time because life was so complicated. Oh. And, you know, I don't want to go into a lot of that, but life was complicated for my parents. You know, they married and divorced each other 4 times. And for over many years. And, you know, my mother's very Jewish, so she only married one man. She never dated or was with anybody else. So 4 times they tried, but it just, I think all the situations and the war made it very difficult.
Wow.
Fortunately, we had other people in our family on my mother's side that really was concerned about us. So we ended up going to boarding school pretty early. And we lived in France for 5 years, and then I went to Naples to a Sacred Heart College there.
Okay.
And then we went to Casablanca for a while, when Casablanca opened up, because it was a non-sectarian school, but we only stayed there 6 months because then the French-Moroccan War started. So then we're back to Italy. Wow. And then it was decided that we should try to come to the States. That was an interesting experience because I didn't speak English. I spoke French and Italian, so we got kind of beat up every day. So we went to Australia for the holidays where my grandparents had gone, and my grandfather, Arthur, could see how unhappy we were. So we ended up staying there, and I went to boarding school there and finished high school there and went to university there for a while. In Australia. So life was pretty complicated. You know, we weren't very close to each other, my brother and my sister and I, even though we are today. And we saw each other on occasion. My brother really objected to the Catholic school, and when he was in his early teens, he refused to go because of the Catholic Church's role in the Holocaust, or his presumed idea of their role. So he ended up going to a non-sectarian school in Australia, but in Geelong, another school. And my sister went there. So it made for an interesting life. I came back to the States in the mid-'60s, and of course I registered for the draft right away, thinking, you know, they'll never bother me, and I got drafted in 2 months. And so then I was in the Air Force, and, you know, had some good experiences there. Spent 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, and that kind of did something to my personality for a while. And came home from there, finished school, got my degree here at UC, and then went on to decide what I was going to do with my life. I was very rudderless, you know. I had my passion was business and accounting, and I just wasn't kind of going anywhere. And then actually through David Winter, Dr. Winter from Westmont,
Yeah.
we were on a board. I was really interested in special kids, so I volunteered at St. Vincent's, and we decided we needed to start a school for special ed kids that was non-religious, non-sectarian. So we started the school called Seton School, and David really encouraged me to change my vocation again, go back to school, and he said, you'll be perfect at this. So I began working there as the administrator and became the president eventually, and stayed there for 13 years until mainstreaming pretty much took most of the kids and put them back in public school.
Oh, okay.
And as a result of that, God did wonderful things. We adopted 2 other children with special needs, and my wife has worked in that field for 35 years, so it was
really?
very complimentary for these kids because we know the system and we know a lot of the issues that are around them. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Wow. So let's back up for a second. So your mom, you mentioned she's 99 years old.
99 and a half.
99
Because now
and a
we're
half.
going by the months.
Right.
Just so
that
she,
counts. Let's count the half. So and she's here.
She's in San Francisco, in Marin County.
And so
She was in Santa Barbara for 35 years.
Okay.
And then there's a program up there that some very prominent Jewish people in Chicago, there's a Holocaust survivors apartment program up there.
Oh,
and
really?
it's on a scaled, scaled affordability things, and it's a beautiful place, beautiful apartments. So she has a very nice 1-bedroom apartment, and she's been there for 15 years now.
Wow. And your siblings? Are they there?
My brother's there in the San Francisco area,
Okay.
and my sister's still in Australia. She never left.
Okay. Wow. So just in general, I mean, so you have strong memories of growing up in France? I mean, is that what is your earliest memory, I should say?
You know, many memories, some good, some very bad. My strongest memory as far as faith is concerned which is the most important thing to me now,
Yep.
is I remember going to Sacré-Cœur, this Sacred Heart school in Naples, and I wasn't 6 yet. And I didn't speak Italian, so that was already a challenge. But there was a nun there, Madre de Musset, I remember her name to this day, and she spoke French. She was from Paris. And so she came up to me, and for some reason, I was not a happy kid. And she came up and said, Jimmy, God loves you. He sent Jesus for you. You don't know what that means today, but you will.
Oh.
And that incident has played into my life, my entire life.
Wow.
And then for some reason I saw some weird movie called Bread and Wine about this little orphan kid finding Jesus in the attic on a crucifix. They shaped me. I mean, they really affected my thinking. And then
Wow.
in later in life, in Catholic school, I was really interested in the church. I went to seminary for less than a year, and then thank God a priest who loved me said, you don't want to do this. We weren't meant to do this. And I didn't. But then I slipped away pretty much from the church. But I never did from the Lord. I remember in Vietnam, I used to drink so much. I mean, it was just insane. I drank every day, probably a bottle of scotch every day. But then I got a promotion, and I remember laying in bed thinking, I'm going to get myself killed here, or I'm going to kill somebody else. So I didn't know what to do. And I hadn't drank before Vietnam. And so I got out of bed, got on my knees, and said, God, you're the only one that can free me from this.
Wow.
And never had another drink for another year and a half in Vietnam.
Wow.
So God has played a very instrumental role in my life many times.
I mean, so that was that kind of the moment where you felt like you surrendered?
No. So when I came home, I was pretty messed up, pretty intense PTSD, a lot of issues there. And I tell my wife these days, I said, if I would have been married to you during this period of time, I would have never stayed married to you. So you're a saint. And because I was not good. I married my wife in 1971. I was out of the service in 69, and I had some pretty bad years. And then in 1976, February 13th, a good friend of mine in Santa Barbara, some people might remember Southern Woods. They were the first wooden toilet seat people and the wooden medicine cabinets. I don't know if people remember that. A huge company. But he became a believer through his wife, who And that was my aha moment. And I remember him calling me on a Friday night, said, Stretch, I got to talk to you. So I said, okay, Rick, tomorrow. And we met downtown and had coffee. And he said, I found Jesus yesterday. And
That's what he said.
I laughed in his face. I just like, okay, so what? And he never left me alone, you know. So finally, and it was kind of through the charismatic renewal time in '76. And so finally, there was nothing much happening in Santa Barbara in that sense. And then finally, I just decided, well, I'll go with him on a Friday night, and then I'll just shut him up. And even that night, God had, you know, in that night, I was going to go. I didn't want to go, but Rick and Kath made me go. But that day on Friday, Rick calls me and says, you can't go with us because we have to take these other people. So I said, fine, you know, and I was going to blow it off. And then it started torrentially raining in Santa Barbara, which is a rare occasion. And so I'm driving near Milpa Street, and I'm thinking, I don't need this. And I had some issues with driving anyway from Vietnam time. And I said, I don't want to do this. And I don't know, you know, it was just something in me drove me down there. And I got saved that night. First time that I would say I got saved.
Wow.
And
was that a church? Was it a church? Or
it was
or
just a renewal movement, people from all over the state,
Okay.
Catholics, Protestants, even Baptists.
Okay.
That's a joke.
Yeah, right. I have Baptist roots. So.
I know.
So let me back up again. So you've been a CEO, you've been an administrator, you've been in the service, and then you ended up pastoring at Calvary here in Santa Barbara for many years.
I did.
Tell us about that.
So what happened when mainstreaming, I wanted to stay in special ed. So when mainstreaming came to be, I didn't want to work for a bureaucracy. And I looked in Texas, actually, in Houston, and I looked in Michigan. And then Ricky Ryan was a pastor at Calvary, and he had taken this interest in me. Because I would probably say that my Christian life never kind of went to the next level until I got to Calvary Chapel.
Huh.
And
With Ricky.
It's the teaching or it's whatever. And Ricky took kind of an interest in me. And one day he took me to lunch and he said, do you ever think about going into ministry? And I laughed. You know, I was making like $150,000 in the 70s, you know. So I said, no, I'm good. And then he said, well, you should pray about that. So I did. And then I decided, well, you know, something in me kind of had an interest. So I came on as a missions coordinator. And then just more and more and more. And Ricky kept saying, well, you know, you're wonderful here. If you're in, you're in. If you're out, you're out. And more where he finally said, you're all in or you're all out. And so it was difficult, you know, because the church was small and not, you know, financially capable of taking care of me. But fortunately, God had set it up so I'd saved a lot of money in my years at Seton School, so I was able to use those savings to basically take care of my family and move through until I was ordained, and then kind of worked my way through. I was at Calvary for 13 years.
Yeah, right. Now let's talk about your adopted girls.
Sure.
So Sarah, Hannah, and Elizabeth, pretty biblical names. I have a Hannah, by the way. Elizabeth passed away when she was 2.5.
Yes.
And I'm interested in, obviously, you know, you've had, I guess, 2 special needs, and you've done a lot of work in special needs, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But talk about the journey with Elizabeth, this adopted child who has some issues, and you walk through a road that ends in her passing. Tell us a little bit about that and how it affected your life.
Well, as I told you earlier, you know, when we determined my wife couldn't have children, we didn't do anything for a while. I wish, you know, I want to be honest about exactly the way things were. We didn't do anything for a while, but then we thought, you know, we'd like to have a child. So we applied to Santa Barbara County Adoptions and went through the process and had a couple of actually very bad disappointments. But then Sarah came along and it was really good. And then after we'd had Sarah for a few years, we decided it's not good to have a one-child family, so let's get a sibling. And then the people that were in our circle, which were a lot of special people, really encouraged us. And again, I wish I could say it was us, but it wasn't. They encouraged us to say, look, you're both very qualified in this field. You have training, you have degrees. Adopt a special kid. Nobody else wants to adopt them.
Right.
So we prayed about it, and God gave us peace, and we adopted Elizabeth from Queen of Angels in Los Angeles, and not realizing that she'd had these serious medical challenges at the time. But we were able to figure it out pretty fast, and so we did everything we could, to save her life. But that was not the Lord's plan. And I will confess, it was very difficult for me, just because of my life. I have a hard time loving and really connecting with people, and Hannah was my heart, and Elizabeth was more of my heart, and Sarah is all my heart. So
Yeah.
I'm sure you have kids, you understand.
Yeah.
So it was difficult when she passed, and it was a very hard process for her before she passed. And so for the next year, it was difficult for me. I left church altogether.
Really?
And I was a leader in our church. I left the church altogether and kind of did my own thing. Didn't really go back into a dark place, but was not interested in anything. I thought I did it all. Born Jewish, raised Catholic, good Protestant. I'm good. So, but then about the next, I'll tell you exactly, the next November, I started to think, this is not good for my oldest daughter, Sarah. I don't like some of the people she's hanging around with, and not Christians. So again, we went back to church for her. And we picked 4 churches where we knew people, and Calvary was the first, and they were meeting at Pebble Hill. And I remember walking in there on Wednesday night, and Dean, I believe in the supernatural. But walking in there on Wednesday night, I had no interest to be there. I was on all these state boards in Sacramento. I had a great life. I was on the National ARC board. I had my life was great. I remember walking in there Wednesday night, and I don't think I'd listened to a message that much as I couldn't remember the last time.
Really?
And I was just captivated with his way to bring out the gospel.
Huh.
And I never stopped going. I canceled everything that I had on Sundays. I kind of got out of other obligations, and I felt that I really, really was committed. So those were the early years. Ricky had only been there about 10 months, and were the early years of Calvary.
Wow.
So I was able to be part of that whole insane growth pattern that happened.
Wow. And then Hannah came along.
And then we decided that we should have still another child, and and again we were thinking we'd just adopt a non-handicapped child, but then the influences that we had around us, and 100% the Lord had us adopt Hannah. And Hannah is, she makes me a better man every day. She's just a wonderful, wonderful young girl.
And is she in a home?
She lived with us for 25 years.
Okay.
And then we started doing some planning for her to have her own apartment. Okay. So we worked to deal with the state where we have her basically 2 days a week.
Okay.
And then they fund 5 days. And then so she has her own apartment, then she has her own staff. Because Hannah's kind of weird. She has mosaic Down syndrome, and she has some autistic traits, and she has very intensive OCD behaviors.
Okay.
So for her to live in community would be practically impossible and very difficult for her. So they would need to medicate her, and she's never been medicated.
That's tough. Yeah. Wow. And she's how old now?
37.
37. Wow.
No, 36.
36.
My other daughter's 38.
I want to talk a little bit about the American European Bethel mission. And you've been in 93 countries. You've seen a lot. Obviously, we've heard about your upbringing. But let's start with, I want to kind of get your perspective a little bit more on the world and different things. But tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing with most of your time.
Well, after I'd spent this time in Calvary, things were changing. Britt Merrick went to Carpinteria, studied reality, and I told Ricky I felt I wanted to make a change. I put in my time, but I wasn't going to make it unless he blessed it. Mm-hmm. I mean, I wouldn't be there if it wasn't for him. So I had a few things. I had an opportunity in London. I had an opportunity in Melbourne, Australia, and he discouraged me in both those things. And I was on the board of American European Bethel Mission in Santa Barbara. It's the oldest Jewish outreach in the world. Started in Odessa, Russia.
Really?
And a huge story. Could be another time.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things. And the director, I think that actually your mother knew her, Vera Kushnir, took me to lunch one day and said, the Lord's been speaking to me, and he told me you should become the pastor of this ministry. And I'm just another one of those things. I looked right in her face and said, you are crazy. they had $1 million of debt. It was just terrible.
My.
It was, she had been trying to keep it going for many years. And I said, not a chance. And not even praying or thinking, just said, not a chance. But then I talked to Ricky about it, and he wasn't laughing. And he said, you don't know what the Lord's doing. You would think you would have learned it by now. So you need to pray about this. And I will. So 2 weeks later we met, and he said, you need to take this job, because if anybody can change this, you can.
Wow.
And I did it based totally on faith and where Ricky had spoken into my life, and really believing that the Lord was taking me in that direction. And it was a tough 10 years, the first 10 years.
First 10 years are always the hardest.
And just changing everything, but it was good. And so then we've kind of fixed the ministry, and we have a huge piece of property in Haifa, which was David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, invited Leon Rosenberg to come to Israel to open an orphanage for Holocaust survivors' children.
Oh, really?
Because he had a lot of notoriety for having an orphanage in Poland, in Lodz, Poland, for Jewish children who had been part of pogroms.
Huh.
And so they had 267 kids in that orphanage who all perished in the Holocaust. And so he was in the States at Wheaton College in 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland. His wife and family was stuck there, and he was stuck here for the whole war. And that's a whole other story, actually, another show. So I came, and I had great support around me. We have our board, the original board that I put in place is the same board I have today, 20 years later.
Wow.
They're all there. And so that's a real blessing. And we've now added some younger board members like your age to make sure that we have a continuum and leave a legacy. And it's been a great experience. In Israel, we have wonderful work going on there. In Haifa, we've rebuilt that property so that we use half the property for hostels, but we only charge $25 a day. And so people come from all over the world. So that's a good income situation for us. And then on the other side, we have a 12-bed recovery program. We call it a discipleship program, and it's for people that we find on the streets in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Haifa. And they're either drug addicts, homeless, alcoholics, or whatever their situation is. And we try to get 12 all the time from that.
Wow.
And then they can come to our program, and they can be there as long as they need to be there. We take care of all their expenses, all their legal problems, medical problems, help them get back into society, reconcile with their families. So we've had about 200 men there since we did this. It's been about 7 years now.
Wow.
And so that's been really wonderful.
That's amazing.
And then in Germany, we have a great ministry there with a majority of young people.
And this is all based here.
It's the headquarters is here. And so what I did a few years ago, just to create more interest in the leadership in these different countries and also free us up from some development, is I formed a board in Israel, Ukraine, and Germany in those countries. Okay. And AEBM still has, Bethel Mission still has a super majority on those boards because we own the properties there. But then this allows their leadership to have a lot more ownership in those ministries. And so Germany has if it was any better, I'd cry.
Wow.
And Israel is the same thing because we've empowered the people that God has brought us in Israel, Germany, and the Ukraine to do the ministry. Right. And then now we have oversight, and we still supply them with a pretty, decent amount of money every year. But they've become a lot more. They own it, and they've, in Israel alone, he probably raises 100,000 of his own money. Okay. In Germany, probably €1 million.
Wow.
So it's pretty fantastic.
And so what is you travel a lot?
I'm the pastor for the different ministries. Okay. And I'm also vice chair of those boards. Okay. And so, and I travel there quite a lot. I teach quite a lot. In Israel, for example, we have 21 partnerships. So my feeling is, missiology has been my interest all my life, even when I was in boarding school. I've always been interested in missions. When I went to a Catholic seminary, that's what I wanted to do, was be a missionary priest. And I studied under Ralph Winter at the U.S. Center for World Missions and have kind of my understanding of missions, but it's been good. So I've never wanted to duplicate services. And so I shut down a lot of things we were doing in different ministries we had and just found other ministries that were doing exactly the same thing and decided how can we come alongside each other and support each other. Together. So I preach at a lot of those churches around Israel and in Germany and the Ukraine and pretty much all over the United States, communicating what's going on, support, and also bringing the Word of God.
Wow, that's wonderful. And the recovery center is in where?
Haifa.
Okay, Haifa.
In Haifa, yeah.
There's a lot of unrest right now in the country, if you haven't noticed, and there's, we have a pandemic, and then we have an economic downturn, and then we have the George Floyd incident, and unrest in the country, anger, legitimate anger, obviously it feels to me like a scab has been picked off at some level of this didn't just pop up overnight, but we're seeing something significant and deep that has been sparked by the George Floyd horrific incident. What are your thoughts on this, and how can we be peacemakers while listening and empathizing and not minimizing the feelings and legitimate anger and hurt that exists in a lot of these communities? What would be your words? You're an elder statesman at some level. I really was interested in hearing your thoughts on this.
It's a complicated issue. The pandemic is a complicated issue. It's hard to really. I'm a news junkie. I read 12 newspapers before I get out of bed in the morning, from Germany, France, England, and the States and Australia, and it's hard to know what to believe. And I'm a data person, and I'm a researcher, and it's hard to really know who am I going to believe. And it's not that people are telling outright lies; is that people are being very selective in what they're communicating, and you don't get the rest of the story, so to speak.
Yeah, right.
And so it's problematic. But I think the way the church has stepped up for the pandemic is notable. And it's worthy of great acclamation, because I think the church has really stepped up, especially to help people with food, single parents, and the elderly. And I think it's been very notable for me. I think this new issue it's an interesting issue for me, because I didn't grow up with the black issue. When I was in Vietnam, the black guys were my friends. Right. And I wanted those black guys in my unit because they were tough soldiers. And so I never understood the whole black-white thing, American thing. And I have, since then, I have a lot of black friends. Jesus came for all people. Yeah. He came to set all people free. And I think anybody that would take an opposing position to that would really need to be questioned in what their faith values are.
Yeah.
I think it's a terrible thing. It's been going on in this country for far too long. But I think as I study it, and as a pastor, this is what I would say. Will this stop because of this? No, because as I told a good pastor friend of mine the other day, for this to stop, it would be like saying sin will stop. And sin will not stop till the return of our Savior. And the thing is, I don't think this will stop.
Right.
But I think this is a great opportunity to wake up and see there is a problem here. There is a real serious concern here. I mean, I think what was done to this fellow is criminal. Yeah. And I think that he should suffer the full consequences for doing that. But I've been involved with the police for many, many years. I'm on the police board.
Yeah, you're a chaplain, right?
Yes. I'm a sheriff's chaplain, but I'm on the Santa Barbara Police Foundation board. I was one of the founders of the PAL program in Santa Barbara. I'm very involved with the police. They do a fabulous job.
Right.
They do a fabulous job. and what it is, for example, the demonstration we had in Santa Barbara on Sunday, it was peaceful and it was good. But I will tell you, if somebody would bother to unpack that, it was the way it was primarily because of the police. They blocked the streets. They brought in all their staff. I went to those briefings, and what they were is to be as accommodating as possible. I mean, it's America. Peaceful demonstration is what we're all about.
Right.
But the key word here is peaceful.
Right.
And so they did everything in their power, including paying a lot of overtime, a lot of extra people, a lot of sheriffs there, highway patrol there, to keep people safe.
Right.
And that's what they do, you know. And I think we need to, we can't dismiss this terrible thing that's happening to people that are being marginalized. This is not right.
Right.
It's not right for our country, but it's not right especially for us as believers. But
Right.
on the other hand, we can't demonize the very people that are trying to protect us.
Right.
And what I'm very scared of about that, if this is America, and I know why I'm here, why I live here, and what this country stands for,
Yeah.
if we don't have them, what we could easily have is vigilantes. And you know, I think about that. If somebody's not protecting my family, I'm going to protect my family.
Right.
And so is anybody else.
Right.
And I shouldn't be protecting my family
Right.
because I may overreact or
Right.
do something. So
Right.
it's a very, very, there's a good side, there's a terrible side, there's terrible loss of life, there's damage, some of this really crazy things that are happening. But it's something that, just like the Rodney King events, it woke us up. It was a wake-up call.
Right.
You know, we need
Yeah.
to do something.
For sure, it was. One final thing. If you're speaking to a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid, young person, right now, and after you've experienced a lot in your life in business, 93 countries, lived all over the world, ministry, you've seen a lot. What one or two things would you say to a young person who's entering this crazy world right now that we're living in? What kind of words of advice or thoughts would you give them as they start out?
Well, I just spent, you know, some time yesterday with a close friend's son, and we kind of talked this through for a few hours. But it's, you know, it's a lot of it is ignorance. You know, you just, I mean, if you, you know, when you get in your car, you don't just throw the book in the glove box and get in the car and drive off. And if you do, it's going to be a curve for you to learn how to operate this vehicle. It's the same thing. I mean, people, I told this young fellow, you need to be informed. Do your homework. Do your homework to know why you feel the way you are. If you don't, those people that were leading that demonstration, you're going to do what they tell you. You're going to believe what they say. You're going to react to anybody unless you do your own homework. You need to find your own idea and your own piece about what it is that's going on and why it is going on. And you'll see you can really make a difference. But I think if you just react emotionally,
Right.
then not much will come from that.
Right, that's good. Well, thank you. What a life.
Yeah.
What a life. The
What a
great
pleasure,
Jim
Dean. Pleasure to know
Stretchberry.
you. Love what you do.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah.
it's good to be together, and we appreciate taking the time to tell your story. We could have gone a lot longer, but
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it. Thank you very much for
Yes,
coming on.
thank you.
We'll see you next time.